I had exactly 3 seconds of silence before the first siren pierced the sky. It was early morning in Tel Aviv, and the sunlight had just started to creep across the limestone buildings outside my hotel window. I stood barefoot on the cold marble floor, clutching my phone, waiting for a response that would never come. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no power. I refreshed the screen again as if that would make a difference. No calls going out, no messages coming in. My name is Leona Hart, and just 48 hours earlier I was a high-ranking executive on the brink of closing the biggest tech acquisition of my career. Now I was stranded in a foreign city under rocket fire, with no contact to the outside world and no idea what was happening back home. What I didn't know then, what would make my blood run cold later, was that my husband, Caleb Rowan, was already gone. 3 days earlier, I had landed in Israel full of energy and purpose. The venture was ambitious, a hybrid AI defense startup called Bionicatel. Their tech was bleeding edge, their infrastructure rough, but I knew if we acquired them, my company would become untouchable in the industry. Caleb had kissed me goodbye at JFK, held my face in his hands like something from a movie. "Be safe, baby," he'd said, "and text me when you land." I had. He didn't reply. At the time, I assumed it was a time zone issue. Or maybe he was just asleep. I didn't push it. I wish I had. My first day in Tel Aviv was a whirlwind. Meetings, factory tours, security briefings. The region had been tense. Yes. But there were always flare-ups here. And I'd traveled enough to know when to worry. Or so I thought. On the second night, I had dinner with Daniel Saar, Bionicatel's founder, a former military engineer with kind eyes and a deep voice. We sat in a quiet restaurant in Nivit Tzedek, drinking strong coffee after a 12-hour day. He noticed me checking my phone repeatedly. "Still nothing?" he asked. I shrugged. "My husband. He's probably busy, or sleeping." Daniel tilted his head slightly like he didn't believe that, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he said, "Make sure your bags stay packed, just in case." That was the first time I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The next morning, it happened. A single siren split the sky. Then another. Then the emergency speakers kicked in. We were told to get to the basement. Quickly, but calmly. An airstrike was reported near Ashdod, and power was cut as a precaution. From the hotel bunker, I stared at the glowing emergency lights and tried to reach anyone, my parents, my assistant, Caleb. No service. I wasn't panicking yet. Not fully. I'd survived worse moments. But by nightfall, the city had locked down. Foreign embassies were unreachable. Flights grounded. No one in or out. I was completely alone. Day 2 of the blackout was the worst. It wasn't just the isolation. It was the realization that the people I thought would come for me weren't. Still no message from Caleb. No check-in, no missed calls, just silence. I started asking around, hoping other Americans had received updates. Some had, others hadn't. But as the days passed, I noticed something strange. My corporate email access was revoked. I couldn't log into my company dashboard. My cloud accounts returned password errors. And the emergency card Caleb and I kept for international travel declined. I contacted Daniel discreetly. "This is more than a power issue," I told him. "Someone's locking me out." He gave me a long look. "Are you sure it's not your company's security protocol?" "No," I said. "I built the protocol." He nodded once and said, "I'll make a few calls." By the time the embassy confirmed I was listed as possibly deceased, I understood what had happened. Caleb thought I was dead. Or worse, he wanted people to think that. According to the embassy staffer who quietly pulled my file, my husband had already filed for emergency probate on my estate. He claimed I was missing, presumed dead in a conflict zone. The paperwork was processed within 48 hours of the attacks. 48 hours. He hadn't even waited for my body. That night, Daniel pulled me into a quiet corner of the hotel's secured floor. "There's more," he said, handing me a flash drive. "What is this?" "Your company. Rowan Holdings. It's been listed for sale." My stomach flipped. "That's not possible," I said. "I'm the primary shareholder. He can't sell without—" He claimed power of attorney, sent notarized documents, signed in New York. The world tilted around me. While I was hiding from missiles in a Tel Aviv basement, Caleb had filed paperwork back home to erase me. And that's when the final blow landed. "He emptied your shared accounts. We traced the funds. They were wired to a private account in Bangkok." "Thailand?" Daniel nodded. "He didn't go alone, Leona." "Kira," I said under my breath. I'd met her once, Caleb's executive assistant. Fresh out of Wharton. Always too eager. Always too close. I had sensed something, but I never wanted to be that woman, the paranoid, jealous wife. Turns out I should have been. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the hotel balcony with a blackout curtain drawn behind me, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the quiet. I wasn't dead, but Caleb needed me to be, because dead women can't fight. They can't claim assets. They can't ruin your tropical honeymoon with your new mistress in Southeast Asia. But I wasn't buried. Not yet. And what Caleb didn't realize, what Kira didn't suspect, was that I was coming back. Not just to survive, but to reclaim everything they tried to steal. The morning the skies cleared over Tel Aviv, I walked to the hotel lobby like a ghost. Airports were still closed, embassies overwhelmed, no flights, no exits, but I had no interest in fleeing just yet. Caleb may have buried me in his mind, but I was still breathing. And now I was furious. He hadn't panicked and made a mistake. He'd executed a plan. While war sirens echoed over rooftops, while I huddled in a dim concrete bunker, he had filed emergency legal petitions claiming I was presumed dead. Not missing, not unreachable. Dead. That detail stuck in my chest like glass. And the worst part? He moved fast, like he knew this window, this chaos, wouldn't last forever. Daniel Saar, my Israeli contact and the founder of Bionicatel, had become my lifeline. Sharp, discreet, and surprisingly connected, he was the only person I trusted not to treat me like a victim. "Your husband is clever," he said, sipping espresso as we sat beneath a shaded pergola in the hotel courtyard. "But not careful." He opened his laptop and pulled up a secure folder. "Kira Lennox, right?" I nodded. "She traveled with him to Phuket on a private charter, booked under the name Callum Rowe, fake ID, but the same passport photo as your husband. They checked into a luxury resort 3 days ago, paid in crypto." I blinked. "Crypto? Your husband's been planning this longer than you think." I exhaled through my nose, staring into the espresso I could barely taste. "How much did he steal?" Daniel turned the screen toward me. It displayed a line of transactions, wire transfers, digital wallet movements. From what I traced so far, a little over $12 million. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. That wasn't just our savings. That was my company's equity, my personal shares, liquidated and moved through dummy corporations Caleb created using shell accounts in Hong Kong and Singapore. All without me. "He even tried to sell your stake in Bionicatel," Daniel added. "We declined, of course. He doesn't have signing power." I looked at him. "You could have gone along with it." "I could have," he agreed, "but I don't sell to vultures, especially not ones who betray their own." That night, I video called Maureen Elliott, my personal attorney in Manhattan, through a dark web browser using Daniel's encrypted line. She hadn't heard from me in days. "Leona," her voice cracked, Oh my God, we thought. I know, listen to me, I'm alive, and I need you to act like I'm not. What? I leaned closer to the screen. Do not tell anyone you've spoken to me, not my board, not my CFO, not the press, especially not Caleb. I need to stay dead for a little while longer. Her eyes narrowed as she realized what I was planning. Tell me everything, she said. The next 72 hours were a blur. While Caleb was sipping cocktails in Phuket with Kira in matching linen outfits, I was working across firewalls and time zones with Daniel and Maureen, gathering everything I needed to take back what was mine. The fake power of attorney, signed by a notary who'd lost their license last year. The financial authorizations, forged. The timestamp on the documents, sent 5 minutes after a missile strike hit Jaffa, while I was live on a hotel security feed in Tel Aviv's safe zone. The photos? I had them, all backed up and time-stamped. I built my case the same way I built my business, precisely, brick by brick. On the fourth day, Daniel gave me the last piece of the puzzle. A contact in Bangkok traced Caleb's offshore shell corporation. Want to know the name he used? I braced myself. LH Legacy Holdings. My initials. My name. He used me to bury me. He's planning to set up a rival firm, Daniel said. Using your name, your ideas, your contacts. The Bionica Tel pitch deck? He downloaded it 2 weeks ago. Of course he did, I whispered. Back home, Maureen was already moving. She filed a court motion to freeze all joint accounts and challenge the validity of the power of attorney. She flagged Caleb's digital asset movements to Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement. She reached out to the IRS to flag potential crypto laundering. But we needed more. We needed eyes. So we brought in Delaney Vaughn, a private investigator who used to work for one of my competitors. She specialized in digital asset tracing and high net worth fraud cases. Her message was short and to the point. I've seen cases like this before, but not this personal. I'll track him down. You build your comeback. I spent the next week quietly rebuilding what Caleb tried to sell, including myself. Emotionally, I felt split in two. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront him, to expose everything to the world. But the other part, the sharper part, knew that revenge, if it was going to land, needed to be calculated. I wasn't going to blow up our life. I was going to repossess it, asset by asset, contract by contract, signature by signature. On the 10th day, the airport reopened. Daniel drove me to Ben Gurion before dawn. The highway was still quiet, lined with soldiers and medical vans. As we approached the terminal, he reached into his jacket and handed me a flash drive. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," he said. "Caleb approached 3 more of your competitors last month. One of them recorded the meeting. He pitched your company as if you were stepping down due to health concerns." I stared at the drive. "You saved it?" "Of course I did. I like to see thieves burn slowly." I almost laughed. Almost. As I boarded the flight to New York, something inside me shifted. I left Leona the wife behind in that Tel Aviv hotel. Now, I was Leona Hart, resurrected. They thought I was gone. Powerless. Dead. But I was just getting started. The thing about being presumed dead is, if you play it right, you get to walk into rooms no one expects you to walk into. I touched down at JFK just after midnight. No press, no family, no company car waiting for me at arrivals. Just the quiet click of my heels on the tile, my scarf pulled tight around my face, and a rental car under a different name. Leona Hart was still dead. But the woman in the driver's seat? She had nothing left to lose, and everything to reclaim. I drove straight to Delaney Vaughn's office in Soho. It was nearly 2 a.m., but she was exactly the kind of woman who thrived at night. Sleek, alert, and always 2 steps ahead. "Caleb's back in New York," she said, without looking up from her screen. "Arrived yesterday. Alone." Kira? I asked. Still in Phuket, booked for a wellness retreat. You'll love this. He's scheduled to meet with 3 of your former investors tomorrow, 9 a.m., Midtown. And what's he planning to offer them? Your company, she said flatly, or rather, the smoke and bones of what's left of it. He's claiming you left everything to him in a sealed directive before your trip. Conveniently, no one can verify it. You know, because you were supposedly vaporized by a missile. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. The rage had calcified into something sharper, something that hummed just beneath my skin. Where's the meeting? Delaney turned her screen toward me. Fifth Avenue, boardroom, glass walls, cameras everywhere. Perfect. The next morning, I stood across the street from the high-rise in a borrowed blazer and a tinted visor hat, watching Caleb walk into the building like he owned it. He looked the same. Expensive suit, unbothered grin, phone glued to his ear, as if the last 2 weeks hadn't been anything more than a business trip. But I saw the difference. There was a flicker of tension in his shoulders, a twitch in his fingers, and most importantly, no sign of Kira. He was flying solo now, vulnerable. I waited until he disappeared inside, then slipped around the side of the building and entered through the service elevator, thanks to a favor from one of my old security contractors, a woman who owed me more than a few favors. By 9:04 a.m., I was sitting silently in a darkened observation room behind a one-way mirror, staring at my own boardroom table. Caleb sat at the head of it. Beside him were 3 men I knew very well: Dennis Hallbrook, Martin Lee, and Corwin Sharp, angel investors from my earliest days. You have my gratitude for coming, Caleb began, his voice oily and controlled. Leona built something exceptional, but in light of recent tragedy, she wanted to ensure continuity. I'm here to fulfill her wishes. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a forged transition agreement. A lie. She left you everything? Dennis asked, skeptical. Caleb nodded solemnly. She wanted someone who understood the core of the business. And of course, I was her husband. Martin squinted. But she was the architect. You were never involved in development, strategy, or... I was involved more than people realized. Caleb interrupted, a little too forcefully. Leona trusted me. Wrong move. Dennis raised an eyebrow. Did she trust you with the offshore accounts too? Caleb blinked. Excuse me? I spoke to someone on your flight from Thailand. Corwin chimed in. They said you seemed pretty celebratory. Caleb tried to smile. Gentlemen, I've been grieving in my own way. Then the lights in the boardroom dimmed. A screen lowered. A projector activated. And my voice filled the room. This is Leona Hart. I am not dead. I have not transferred ownership of my company, my name, or my future to anyone, especially not Caleb Rowan. Caleb's face went white. The footage continued. It was a recorded statement Maureen and I had filmed 2 days prior, legally certified, time-stamped, and backed by documentation. I walked through the fraudulent power of attorney, the forged authorizations, the money laundering, and the faked notarizations. I ended with, to my investors, if Caleb Rowan has approached you on my behalf, consider this your legal notice. He is not authorized to sell, negotiate, or represent my interests. Anyone who transacts with him does so at their own risk. I will see you in court. The screen went dark. Silence followed. Then came a slow clap. From behind the mirror wall. I stepped through the side door and into the boardroom. Caleb's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Leona? Martin said, stunned. Alive and well, I replied, crossing the room with calm precision. And very much done being erased. Caleb finally stood. How did you? I didn't die, I said. You just stopped looking. He stepped toward me, eyes darting around the room. This isn't what you think. I panicked. I thought I lost you. I was grieving. You were transferring digital assets to Bangkok within 48 hours. I replied coolly. Grief must look different when it's offshore. Dennis turned to him. You told us she left you everything. I was misled, Caleb stammered. No, I said, pulling a flash drive from my pocket. You misled everyone, including the woman you promised to protect. He reached for my hand. I didn't flinch, but I didn't take it either. I trusted you with my name, my work, my legacy. And I didn't know what to do without you. You sold me, I said flatly. You gave my company a price tag before they even announced the casualty list. That night, Maureen filed an emergency injunction against Caleb Rowan for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, identity theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Delaney submitted footage and tracking logs proving his crypto laundering and unauthorized wire transfers. The SEC was notified, and the FBI flagged Caleb's international transactions for further review. But as I sat in my apartment, watching the city I loved flicker to life outside my windows, the revenge didn't feel like a win. Not yet. Because he hadn't just stolen money. He had tried to take me. The thing about betrayal is that once it starts, it rarely stops with just one person. A week after I returned from Tel Aviv, I received an anonymous tip. A folder delivered to my building's concierge in a plain white envelope. No name, no return address. Inside were printed screenshots, emails, business cards, a photo of a new website still in development, Kira Lennox Enterprises. At the top of the site was a company name that stopped me cold, LH Solutions Group. Innovative, intelligent, inspired by legacy. Legacy. She had the audacity to brand her stolen startup using my initials. While Caleb was busy lawyering up and pleading misunderstanding to every investor he had swindled, Kira Lennox was building her own kingdom. One floor below the ruins of mine. She hadn't just followed him. She had co-written the plan. I scrolled through the email printouts. Messages to developers about white labeling my software. Prototypes lifted straight from my Bionica pitch decks. Early invitations to investors I'd personally pitched in Singapore and Geneva. And a new launch scheduled for Q1 under her name, only she wasn't hiding. She was preparing to replace me. I met with Maureen and Delaney the next morning. She registered the LLC in Delaware 6 days ago, Delaney said. Filed with an anonymous partner, likely Caleb. We're still tracing her funding source, but most of it is coming from private crypto wallets. The same ones tied to your company's sale attempt. She's trying to scrub the origin, Maureen added, but it won't hold. Not when we can prove she had access to proprietary material and financial systems. She's smart, I said. She didn't try to mimic my company outright, just close enough to confuse investors and present it as a natural evolution. Delaney nodded. She's going for optics, to make it look like you passed the torch to her. No, I said. She's trying to wear my skin. By Thursday, Kira was back in New York. She didn't know I was watching her as she exited her Uber in a white trench coat and walked into a private club in Tribeca. She didn't know I'd seen the calendar invite she sent to 5 of my former board members for a closed-door investment opportunity. She was planning a launch. And she was doing it fast. Before the lawsuits hit, before the heat caught up with her. But she'd underestimated me, because I wasn't chasing justice anymore. I was laying my own trap. The next morning, I sent a single email. Subject: Confidential invitation from LH. Legacy reclaimed. I'll be hosting a private evening session for former stakeholders, partners, and members of the Innovation Board. This is not a pitch. It's a reckoning. LH, within 6 hours, I had 17 RSVPs, including 2 of the 5 Kira had targeted. Delaney arranged the location, an art loft in Soho with blackout windows and soundproof walls. Daniel Sar flew in from Tel Aviv to speak on my behalf. He brought proof that Kira had attempted to resell confidential Israeli military-grade IP under her own brand, a move that would do more than tank a startup. It would invite federal criminal charges. That night, I wore black. Not because I wanted to intimidate anyone, but because I was, in a way, attending a funeral. Not mine. Hers. My guests arrived at 7 p.m. sharp. I stood before them without a slideshow, without a product demo, without a single polished deck. Just the truth. I told them how Caleb declared me dead, how Kira used my network to rebrand herself, how she siphoned trust, ideas, and investor relationships like a second-hand thief with a new lipstick and an old plan. And then Daniel took the floor. He explained the classified nature of the Bionicatel prototypes, the NDA violations, the export violations, the international implications. The room fell into a stunned silence. One of the board members, a man named Ron Mathers, who once offered to back my second startup, stood and said, "I took her meeting." My breath caught. "She tried to sell me a civilian-ready version of your emergency response interface. I thought it felt too close to your work. I didn't realize she had stolen it outright." He looked at me, his voice tight. "I won't make that mistake again." The next day, Maureen filed a cease and desist against Kira Lennox Enterprises. We submitted proof of trade secret theft, IP misuse, and breach of confidentiality. We filed for an injunction to freeze all assets, lock all pre-launch partnerships, and halt any transfer of sensitive technology. Then came the cherry on top. A whistleblower tip submitted to the Department of Commerce, flagging her for unauthorized export attempts of classified innovation tied to dual-use defense systems. Even if she wriggled free of civil penalties, she was now on the radar of federal regulators. 3 days later, I saw her in person. Kira Lennox stormed into the lobby of my corporate building. Hair perfect, heels sharp, mouth curled like she'd chewed something bitter. "You could have called me," she hissed. "We didn't have to do this publicly." "We didn't do anything publicly," I replied. "You did." She crossed her arms. "You don't understand what Caleb told me. I thought you were gone." "I was gone, and you saw an opportunity." "It wasn't like that." I raised my eyebrows. "Then what was it like, Kira? Tell me. How does it feel to build a career out of my bones?" "I didn't steal anything you didn't leave unguarded," she snapped. And there it was. The mask slipped. The ambition flared. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For confirming everything in front of the building's cameras." She paled. "You'll be served in the morning," I added, stepping into the elevator. "You might want to get a lawyer and a passport, because this isn't just civil anymore." The doors closed between us, and I never saw her in that lobby again. The morning I officially returned from the dead, it wasn't with press conferences or drama. It was with a single email blast to every investor, client, and partner I'd ever worked with. Subject: LH is alive and reclaiming everything. To those who believed in me, I never left. I was buried, not by war, but by greed. The world now knows I survived Tel Aviv. What it's about to see is how I rebuild, not from scratch, but from what was stolen. Leona Hart, founder, LHX Technologies, formerly Hart Rowan Industries. It hit inboxes at 8:01 a.m. By 8:17, my phone hadn't stopped buzzing. While Kira's lawyers scrambled to explain export violations and Caleb ghosted legal counsel for the third time in a week, I stood in my new office, a sleek, sun-drenched loft in Brooklyn Heights, overlooking the East River. I'd named it LHX Technologies. No more Hart Rowan. No more legacy built beside a man who tried to erase me. LHX stood for Legacy Hacked, Reclaimed, and Reinvented. It wasn't just a company. It was a message. 2 weeks earlier, Daniel Saar had introduced me to a private coalition of defense tech innovators in Europe, the kind of leaders who didn't want flash, just results and integrity. They already knew what Bionic Intel was. They'd heard about the betrayal, and they were eager to fund the comeback. Maureen worked around the clock to restructure my ownership stake in the US and nullify Caleb's false filings. Delaney tracked offshore assets, tracing stolen funds to crypto wallets that had once purchased Kira's fake launch. And Caroline, a fellow founder I once mentored, reached out with a single line: "If you want to make this loud, I have a stage." The following weekend, I walked onto that stage. TechFront International Conference, Berlin. The crowd? Over 2,000 leaders, funders, engineers, and analysts from across the globe. Most had heard the rumors, the story of a woman left for dead in a war zone, only to return to expose her own husband's fraud. I looked out across the room and exhaled. "Let's talk about theft," I began. Not of wallets, not of passwords, but of identity, of trust, of intellectual bloodlines. For 20 minutes, I didn't pitch a product. I pitched resilience. I told them about Tel Aviv, about the bunker, about being cut off from the world while someone I loved sold pieces of my life like furniture at an estate sale. But I didn't end on pain. I ended on what came next. You can clone software, you can plagiarize a business plan, but you cannot replicate vision. You can't teach tenacity. And no one, not a husband, not a thief, not a fraud, can replace the original. The room erupted. After that speech, I received 37 partnership inquiries. Within a week, LHX Technologies closed $18.7 million in seed funding. Back in New York, the hits kept coming, but this time, not to me. Caleb's assets were frozen by federal order. His accounts flagged. One of his shell corporations had failed to report taxable gains, and the IRS was thrilled to dig deeper. Kira? She vanished from LinkedIn. Her company site redirected to a dead domain. Rumor was she fled to Montenegro to avoid indictment. Her legacy was over before it even launched. Meanwhile, I bought back 72% of my company's original equity, at a fraction of what Caleb tried to sell it for. The irony? I rebuilt the entire thing without him. By mid-fall, the media came calling. They wanted the exposé, the headlines, the photo of me standing on Caleb's metaphorical grave. I declined. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because I no longer needed him to complete my story. Instead, I wrote my own editorial. It ran on the front page of Tech Herald Weekly, titled, "Don't Call It a Comeback, I Never Left." There's a kind of silence that settles in after the storm. Not peace, exactly, but clarity. That was what I felt as I stood alone one evening on the balcony of my apartment, sipping tea while watching the city flicker alive below. I thought about the things Caleb took, the bank accounts, the company name, my time. And then I thought about what he couldn't touch: my ability to rise, my gift for strategy, my soul. A week later, I visited my old office building for the first time since returning from Tel Aviv. The security guard, Marco, blinked in disbelief. "Ms. Hart?" I smiled. "In the flesh." He opened the door with reverence. The floor was empty, gutted, abandoned like a war-torn country no one claimed. I walked through it slowly, the echoes of my past whispering from the corners. The deals, the stress, the long nights and early flights. And then, the betrayal. But instead of pain, I felt a quiet resolve. I placed a single envelope on the conference table. Inside was a note. "To the next woman who builds something here. Don't let anyone take credit for your brilliance. Don't romanticize loyalty. Protect your name. Own your worth. And never, ever let them bury you alive. Leona." 6 months after I stepped off that flight from Tel Aviv and realized my world had been sold out from under me, I stood on the rooftop of LHX Technologies, a building that shouldn't have existed, a future they tried to erase. The skyline glittered around me, and below, the city hummed with noise and momentum. I wasn't just back. I was rebuilding something bigger. After the Berlin keynote, offers poured in, not just for partnerships, but for something more surprising: mentorship. Young women in tech, founders, engineers, analysts, all reaching out with stories that sounded far too familiar. They weren't just looking for funding, they were looking for resilience. For someone who understood how betrayal doesn't just come from competitors, but from people you trusted most. So I built something for them. Project Reclaim was born, a nonprofit accelerator dedicated to supporting women whose ventures had been sabotaged by partners, spouses, or systemic bias. We offered legal resources, emotional support, forensic accounting audits, and the most valuable thing of all: belief. One of our first founders was Amina Safar, a brilliant coder from Detroit who had co-founded a logistics startup, only to have her CTO embezzle their seed funds and pin the failure on her in the press. She came to our office with a laptop, a notebook, and tear-streaked cheeks. "I can't trust anyone anymore," she said. I put my hand on hers. "That's okay," I replied. "You don't have to trust anyone else right now. Just trust yourself." She rebuilt her company in under 4 months, and this time, kept all the equity. The press kept asking for interviews. They wanted to revisit the husband who faked her death headline. They wanted juicy details about Kira, who had resurfaced briefly in Dubai before quietly disappearing again. I declined most requests. But I did give one final interview, not for a news channel, not for a glossy magazine, but for a podcast run by 3 women in their 20s who called their show Unmuted. The host asked me the question no one else had. "What do you wish someone had told you before all this happened?" I paused, then said, "That loving someone doesn't mean handing them the keys to your identity. That strength isn't about silence. It's about clarity. And that the scariest moment in your life may just become the door to your greatest chapter." Caleb eventually took a plea deal. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the fraudulent transfers, the shell corporations. He avoided prison by cooperating, which meant turning over everything: names, accounts, even a confession letter where he claimed he truly thought I'd died and acted out of emotional desperation. I didn't attend the hearing. There was nothing left to hear. He forfeited nearly everything he'd taken. The money was redistributed, the assets returned. But none of that was what mattered most to me. What mattered was this: I never needed revenge to win. I just needed the truth. One night, about 9 months after my return, I stood outside the building that once housed Hart Rowan Industries. It had been sold, then sold again. Now it was a startup hub filled with bright-eyed teams writing code at midnight and dreaming of disruption. I left a note at the front desk. "To whoever builds next, choose your partners wisely, keep your name, and when the world tells you it's over, rewrite the ending." Then I walked away without looking back. A year later, LHX had grown from a rooftop office in Brooklyn to 3 locations: New York, Berlin, and Singapore. We'd launched our first emergency response AI platform, secured government contracts, and trained a new generation of women to detect financial coercion early in the startup lifecycle. But the moment I'm proudest of was quiet. No applause, no spotlight. Just a quiet Sunday morning when I received a handwritten note from a founder in Mexico City. She'd been on the verge of giving up after her fiancé cleaned out their business account and ghosted. But then she listened to my podcast episode, and she stayed. She wrote, "You reminded me that I am the blueprint, not him. Thank you for being the proof that we come back stronger. I folded the letter and placed it in my top desk drawer, right beside my passport, and a copy of the note Caleb left me that day in our kitchen. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. I don't keep it out of pain. I keep it because it reminds me what not to believe. Because sometimes the cruelest words are just camouflage for fear, and the loudest betrayals are nothing more than desperate men trying to silence women they know can outbuild them. My name is Leona Hart. I was left for dead. I was stolen from. I was betrayed. But none of that defines me. What defines me is this. I came back. I reclaimed it all. And now I help others do the same.